What's going on, everybody? Gunnar here, and today is all about tying Bob Popovics extended body bulkhead on this 6/0 swim bait hook. Check it out. So before we get started, if you have enjoyed this hook, the GB Predator swim bait hook, if you enjoy the bulkhead or any of the other patterns, you can check out a little bit of merch on the website. I'm also going to have a poster up for this pattern, as well as the Bucktail Deceiver, the Chosen One swim bait, right? I did a video about that stuff, but I have a really cool poster for all this stuff that you guys can check out too on the merch store, which you can check out in the description. So I'll have a link to that. You can also find it actually on the YouTube page that you're on right now while you're watching. But what we're going to do today is tie Bob Popovics Bulkhead swim bait style. And this is what I wanted this hook for. This, to me, is the coolest thing. It's so cool. So this is the first one I ever did. Right here, right out of the box, literally sat down and whipped this guy up. This is what you're going to see swimming in that little swimming clip. It's everything I ever wanted. This is the rigging. It's a little different than the 4/0 in that I wanted to be able to do kind of a full dressed tail stack. And what's really cool is when you put that tail stack back here, you can make this nice limp hackle kind of flash tail dressing over some bucktail. And it's not going to fall. It has nothing to do with that hook point and gap, and everything up here is just bucktail and flash. So it allows you to make a really nice, long, full-dressed, 8-inch weedless bulkhead fly. And that, to me, is the sickest thing. And if you see how much room I have right there at that back shank, it's exactly how you do kind of the beast shank tail or a game changer tail. And so you just tie in your shank, 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 thread it through, and then tie the same rig that we're going to tie today. And that's how you make it basically slicker than snot so that you can do your tail dressings however you want. Now, something you need to be aware of is, unlike your normal hook bulkhead, typically it's a short shank hook fly for the most part, but it doesn't really matter. Even a long shank hook is not as long as this 6/0 is. It's a really long tying platform. But when you displace this water at the head, you really want to make sure that it's collapsing towards that tail. If you only displace a little bit of water and it collapses at the middle of the fly, well, the middle of the fly can't move very much. The middle of the fly is just designed to get out of the way. It's not designed to swim. So you'll get a little bit of tip action from the bucktail, a little bit of swim out of the bucktail, but you're not going to get the full tail kicks that you'd normally see in a normal long style bulkhead. So the trick to that, especially if you tie the changer tail or the shank to beast tail, you want to start doing this bulkhead like literally, you know, I'm going to do reverse hollow ties in the middle of that shank, the front of that shank, and then bulkhead, 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 bulkhead tie for the entire shank, so that I'm have big beefy shoulders right here so that the water's collapsing towards the tail, which I want to move. If you collapse, all that water collapses in the mid body, it's going to kind of stall the fly out and it won't have the same kick. So that's the biggest thing you want to pay attention to. Now, to tie this rig, you need a 20mm shank in the back. You're going to use a glass bead to pinch the mono so that it's tight against this little resin bead. You could use resin, you could use tying thread, you could use a little just dub on some material right there. I'm using an Owner UV Glow soft bead, size 3. Now, the size 3 is really tight on the 6/0, but it fits. The size 4 was a little bit loose, so you could use the size 4, but then you're going to want to glue it in place. Then we're going to come into a 35mm shank, and this is all just rigged on something called mono straights, which is a piece of mono that I've removed the memory from. You want to check out how to make these? I got a video for you, but that's all you need. 60-pound mono without any memory. We're going to tie the whole fly. I like to use, what is this? 0.2mm, which is like 0.08 of an inch Vivus monofilament. Really heavy gauge mono. It's like 6 or 8 pound breaking strength. I've never broken this yet, which is insane for me to say about a tying thread, because I'll usually break them in about 5 minutes just because I pull real hard. I have yet to break this. It's really fun to tie with. And when you tie with that mono with some CA+ super glue, it plastic welds the whole system together, and you need some serious time and a razor blade to get this thing apart, so it's beyond durable. Now we're going to tie this fly with some sunburst yellow bucktail, and then this is like a root beer bucktail. These are not premium bucktails. What's really sick is because you're able to tie a tail and you're able to tie this whole gap, and then you're able to tie the head. You don't need 7-inch bucktail or 6-inch bucktail. These are nice. They're maybe 4.5, 5-inch tails, but they're not ultra premium and they're not short. So it's just a nice mid-length tail, 4-inch plus, that you can find basically at most fly shops if you do a little selection. We're going to come in with my favorite of all the Flashaboos Polar Flash. This is gold, and then we'll do just a little top dressing of copper right at the front for like a nice dark sucker color. And then the only other thing you need is some hackles. Now these hackles, you could do strung saddle, you could buy a whole rooster cape, you could come in with some thin dry fly hackles. Basically I found this at a show, and it was some garbage hackle for dry fly tying, but some really nice kind of thin and mid-length deceiver style hackles for streamer tying. So it was really cheap. So I found that at a fly show, and that's what we're going to be using, just like 5 or 6 on that tail stack to get some nice tapered tail material that's very limp. Also, I like having kind of a darker tail, because if you look at a lot of suckers and you look at smallmouth and anything else, they all have dark tails. So it's just kind of a nice little accent to do the whole fly with. So it's everything you need to know. Let's jump in. I'm going to be as thorough as I have ever been probably with bucktail, because it's my favorite thing to work with. It has a ton of nuance. I want to describe why I'm using certain techniques, especially in that mid-body shank, to help support and lift that hook and keep everything balanced. So it's going to be technical, but hopefully helpful. Let's dive in and tie the sickest 8-inch Swimbait Bulkhead on the planet. This is probably the best fly I've ever tied in my life, by the way, so this video is going to be subpar compared to this, but I will do my best to tie it just like that. Let's do it. So as mentioned earlier, first thing we're coming in with is a 20mm articulated shank. This one's from Flyman. Sometimes the eyes aren't perfectly square up, so just get that in your vise and square it. If you start on the double R bend, you won't get a lot of flex. You'll be able to lock that in place really quick and easy. Now I'm going to come in with one of my mono straights. I've been getting questions on how long people should make these. Basically make them as long as you can. But you'll see here when I pull them out of my Bic pen, you know, mine are the full length of that Bic pen and then a little bit extra. So if you look at that, I just have maybe an inch sticking out on either side. So that's how long I make them. I don't know, it's 6 inches. So if you can, make them 8. If you can, make them 9, whatever. The longer they are, the more use they'll be for you. But 6 inches is nice. So I have that threaded through that R bend, and it's just so I can get my 2 strands right on top and lock them in place. And then I'm going to tie that straight out the nose. You see I'm reefing on this, and again, I've never broken this thread yet, which to me is insane. Usually I snap threads real quick. So that 8,000 7-inch mono, it's becoming my my favorite all-time thread to tie with. Now I'm going to shorten those up a little bit, and I'm going to keep these tag ends, because you're going to see I use those to stack a rattle and make a nice square platform on my 6-aught here. Then I'm going to come in with some CA Plus and let that just meld and mold and melt and re-adhere and make a sick little plastic welded thing. For the tails, again, not super premium, but nice, about 5-inch tail. And I'm going to take just a pinch to give everything some structure. Of all the pinches, this one could be short. So I'm going to come up maybe and get some of my tip hair. That's not going to have a lot of flare to it. It's a little bit shorter. Usually this is premium, which is why it's very picked over. This usually has a lot of trapped air, which I like to do for the head. Something I will mention is I like tails that have a little bit of crinkle to it. You'll see this root beer one. It doesn't have very much crinkle. It's not my favorite. You have to use more to get the same kind of fill-in characteristics and make a nice full head. But that one has some nice flare to it, so it makes tying the bulkhead pretty easy. So I'm going to come up here with some deader hairs that don't have as much trapped air. Just take a pinch. All these bucktail stacks are very, very thin. Clean out the butts. A lot of times there's hair and underfur in there and short fibers that you don't need. And what we're going to do is we're going to stack it right on top. You see I have my shank dead center on my vise so that my vise isn't in my way. I'm going to cut that bucktail perfectly clean at a 90-degree angle. And this takes a little bit of practice, but when I set that down on my hook, you see I keep that 90-degree angle. loose thread turn. If your thread falls away from your fingers, spin it counterclockwise. It'll come up and relax right against my fingers. Take 1, 2, 3 turns. A little bit of pressure, but not a lot. And then your thumbnail goes right on those tying threads. You'll see, because I have my left hand's always on my bobbin. I never let go of that bobbin when I'm working with stuff. And I'm just pinching where those 3 thread turns are. And every time you pinch it, it just moves away from that thread pressure. And I'm trying to get an even distribution. Now I'm about to reef on this. I'm going to support that and then reef on it. Just kind of like stacking deer hair. You don't want to reef on that in your vise without supporting it, or else you'll just rip it out. And then come in and lock those butts down. Now that will never pull out, ever, ever. I'll go straight to the hook eye because I'm going to make kind of a flat bump here with my mylar, my polar flash, and then I'm going to use that flat bump to stack all my hackles on. Now, polar flash is my favorite looking flash. I think it has the best texture, the best characteristics. I think it has some of the best movement, but it does get tangled in pike teeth. So one of the things you're going to see me do is I'm going to take a wire finger dub brush and I'm going to brush it out. Now this breaks some of those strands and it breaks the woven characteristics. And what's cool though is that the flash maintains some of its texture and it gives it some really nice light reflecting properties that a normal straight flat piece of flash boot doesn't have. And on top of that, it makes it limper because it's kind of had more material handling. Now I just took my thread back gently and I collapsed that tail a little bit, so I'm wrapping backwards with less pressure so that my tail is not super flared and bulky. You see I got this nice flat base right here that I've created having worked backwards and having tied in that flash boot at the eye and then made a flat base so I don't have angular sections there. I'm going to come in and that flat base is going to allow me to stack my hackles. Now I'm going to preen out hackles that are the right length for this fly. So you'll see I'll just come and select them and they're 5 inches, right? They're not super long. And what's really nice is I'm selecting the length so that I can tie them in up in the fuzzy stuff. Because the fuzzy stuff, the stem is flat. It's at the same angle, the same plane as that feather. So if I stack it on top, it stays on top. Stack it on the side, it stays on side. It's not going to rotate and fight your tying thread. So pick out the length that you want so that you can tie in a little bit of that fuzz and it'll be smooth going. Now I'm going to select however many I select, 5, 6. So give me a sec. So now I can just take that hackle, boom, and it stays right where I put it. If you can, put the longer ones on top. And these are all, more or less, just concave down. So that means that the shiny side, the dark side of the feather, is on top, and the kind of natural curvature of the feather hugs the bucktail. Then you just work your way around, stacking those feathers. That's a nice long one. We'll save that one for over there. So far this is going well. I've had enough coffee today, I think is what the difference is. Woke up, been sipping coffee. Now I'm going to reef on these. Tie back, make sure those are fine. I'm going to do a careful step down to my eye here. Come up with a half hitch, come up with a whip finish. Plastic weld all of that together. And that right there is a super limp, supported hackle tail with a good bit of flash in it for an extended body rig. Now I'm going to come in with my 35mm shank and I'm going to tilt my vise up kind of out of the way because that shank, I'm going to have to run that mono straight out the back of that shank. Again, this hook eye, shank eye is just a little bit cockeye. Now it's leveled out and I'm going to check the camera, make sure that's still in frame. All right, that's all looking good. Again, start your thread on that double bend. See, I have no flex. If I start this thing way up here, not very fun. Start it on the R bend, get that thing locked in place, and now you have that R bend supporting that shank and it doesn't flex and wiggle like crazy. Obviously, it's still soft and it has a long amount of leverage for my thread. I can still flex it. That's not what I'm arguing for. Just Start it on the arbend. Now I'm going to come in with a tires glass bead and large. You'll see in my shop I carry large and medium, and it's because not everybody's going to use the same diameter mono to do your mono rig. So for 28 thousandths of an inch, slightly larger I suppose, 60 pound, I like to use the large glass bead. You're going to want to put that bead on, and this is going to keep your mono pinched as you thread the hook through this point right here. It's going to go between the glass bead and that shank. It's going to keep that mono pinched so that you have friction against the UV soft glow bead so that you can support the weight of the hook. Now this section does not need to be super long, and basically I'm just trying to get the mono to split that arbend. So I have one piece on each side, and it's going to ride dead center on that arbend. And that is literally about perfect. It's about maybe a 1 inch gap or slightly smaller. And what you have to understand is you can make up the distance. I don't normally let go of my bobbin, but I will. So if this distance is really long, well then you'll just tie that in really close. If this distance is really short, then you'll extend that back a little bit. So you make up the distance with this piece of mono. This attachment fixes any mistakes that you make here. If that makes sense. Now I want this to be pretty close so that my bucktail work is seamless. And I'm going to lock that in place, make sure that shank is nice and vertical. I'm going to reef on this in that arbend and then drop those guys down to the underside and get them where I want them. So I'm just using my fingers to control and make sure that the mono doesn't move around and get all wanky on me. I'm going to come in with a new mono straight. This one I've already cut in half, so it's shorter, so I don't have as much waste. I'm going to tie that right on top. You'll see that it's just roly-poly for a little bit. My fingers are in the way of the camera because I'm just keeping it right on top. And I just like the one piece coming off so that it has some good flex to it, because I want that whole system to bend down out of the way. I don't want it to be super stiff. Right? I want that flex of the single piece of mono. And you'll see every once in a while when I'm tying with this thread, I'll just reef on that thing, man. And every time I do, I'm always supporting, I'm always grabbing, I'm making sure I don't just open reef on it, or else you're going to get into a little bit of trouble there. Now this first one, stack, I'm basically going to split this 35 millimeter shank into thirds. 1, 2, 3. Just like that to fill it up with bucktail. You want to kind of get back towards that arbend so that you can bridge the gap in this extended body so it looks seamless. You don't want a big gap between your 35 millimeter shank and your 25 or your 20 millimeter shank. Again, we'll just shorten that up a little bit so it's out of the way. It's coming back in with bucktail. Again, I'm going to do the whole extended body out of the sunburst. Now I'm going to use a nice long section to help bridge this gap. And I'm going to tie it in the same way I tied in the tail. So you're going to cut that off the hide. I'm in the prime zone right here, getting my length. There's going to be some short fibers I don't need, and there's going to be some insulative hairs that I don't need. I'm going to use this as long as I can to bridge that gap. So it's a nice smooth transition. Pack those tips if I need to, cut them vertically and clean. This still has some wet glue on it, but I'm pretty sure I won't glue my fingers to my shank. Let's hope so. See, I can put that on there vertical. That takes practice. You need to be able to manipulate this that you can put it down vertical. Come up, if you can, spin counterclockwise. It'll relax against my fingers. See how controlled that is? It's not falling off the material or away. Now as I cinch that down, I need to manipulate my hand so that it compresses vertical and it doesn't get all wanky from my thread pressure. 3 turns right on top of each other, fingernail right on top of your thread turns. And again, I have tension on this bobbin. I never let go of the bobbin, I just switch hands. You need to be able to tie with both hands in that regards. I'm going to pinch that thing. And I pinch right on top of that thread that I put on top. Make sure it's nice and even, symmetrical, support, flare, just like spinning some deer hair. Then I'm gonna walk those butts down. I'm telling you what, you will never in your life get that thing to budge out of there, ever. Now I'm gonna come in and I'm just gonna dress kind of the top every once in a while with polar flash, and the bottom about half as often with polar flash. And the nice thing about the flash is you can hide your mistakes. If your bucktail is a little short, then you can bridge that gap with flash, if that makes sense. If your bucktail is a little short, bridge it with flash, because in the water, the flash will reflect light and kind of clean up that silhouette, even if your silhouette's not perfect. The only person who's going to know it's not perfect is you. The fish ain't going to know, just you. You can see my vise is just forcing hair out of the way, but that's actually totally fine. Now I'm going to come up to the middle of that shank and put some glue down to plastic weld all that, because trust me, this thing's going to get chewed on by some e-socks. That's the plan. I'm going to get another premium stack here. Now what you're going to see me do, this is a technique called a reverse bulkhead or a hidden bulkhead, and it's not going to be super extreme, but what you're going to see is I'm going to intentionally, very intentionally, leave the butts in a wee bit long. Now this does a few things, and I'll shut up, let me tie this in real quick, but I'm going to leave that a little bit long, change my hands, everything's nice and vertical, nice catch, 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 3, same place, manipulate it, move it. Oh, it's so much easier to tie when you're away from your vice jaws a little bit there. Look at that. Now, this does a few things. Increased buoyancy. A beautiful thing to have on that middle of the shank, pushing up on that UV glow bead for support. It's also going to help the fly suspend, especially if you tie it with a rattle, because now it's going to have quite a bit of weight to it. Second thing, increased water resistance. Very good thing to have in the middle of that shank to support that hook weight. Third thing is it stops this from collapsing when you hollow tie it. It helps give it structure and support. It's not just the stiffness of the bucktail, but now you also have a small material dam behind it. Now I only took 3 turns of thread on that. I'm going to take maybe a 4th, maybe a 5th. Look how hard I am pulling. I don't know if you can tell. I'm shaking my whole table. I would absolutely, if this was any other thread, I'd just rip it right out besides maybe GSP. Now take your fingers and just, I have not let go. I just switched hands, never let go. This is always under tension. If I were to let go and then manipulate this bucktail, those 5 turns would just loosen up, and then this bucktail would be able to pull out. You never let go of that bobbin, ever. And I'm going to push this back. And I'm just kind of making a little cone with my fingers. And the thing is, you want the hair to bend backwards. You don't want the hair to bend off to the side and get wrapped. So you're trying to make a nice little cone with your fingers. I switched hands, never let go of that bobbin, and I'm going to preen that back, and then I'm going to wiggle my thread through with a slight arc. That's going to trap the least amount of hairs possible, and now I'm going to make a ramp. Now this ramp for hollow tying doesn't go on top of the bucktail, it just pushes it back, and you see I'm going to use quite a bit of space to do this, meaning I'm going to go down the ramp, and then up the ramp, and then down the ramp, and then up the ramp. And the whole point of going down, up, is if you build it all in one spot, it's going to fall off and collapse, and you'll lose control. Now I can't really see what my bottom angle is, because my vise is disrupting it, but I can match the angle off the top. That looks pretty darn nice. Because this is the tail stack on there, I'm going to collapse it a little bit more, but I'm happy with that, and it's perfectly symmetrical. That was tied in the round. I'm going to come back in with another layer of polar flash. I'm going to put taper into my flash boo. So every time I'm going to cut this one 2 inches short, and then I'm going to make the tips uneven so that I never have a straight line. I like to drape that around my thread, pin it to the top, and you'll see I have half of it. Because when you wrap it around, half goes that way, half goes the other way. And now I can kind of manipulate this, and I'm technically doing like a V-tie, which you would do with synthetic kind of high and low tie, saltwater tying. And that allows me to drape it and veil it over the back of that fly. And this one was 2 inches shorter, that one was at full length, that one was at full length. So I'm starting to build taper with my flash as well as the bucktail. And this is a really good opportunity because you're not going to crowd the hook eye. You have room to work to put a stack on the bottom and kind of make sure you have 360-degree flash. Now I don't do that for the whole fly because it takes a long time and the benefit is not that great. So I like to keep it on top because it's easy and it's fast and it's more timely. And then every once in a while, like every other stack or every third stack, pin some to the bottom, just like that. Now we're right up here at the fun zone. This is, everybody loves hook eyes. Don't crowd your hook eye, people. Don't crowd your hook eye. Now I'm coming back in to the prime zone, this nice little third mark here. It is money. As you go forward and progress with your bucktail, the stacks should get slightly closer together, which we kind of have a vague perspective of that because we're breaking this up as we build our extended body, but they should get closer together and they should get larger quantities, literally denser. You should use more material as you progress up the hook, building the shoulders and the bulk. And so again, hidden bulkhead tie. I'm using this distance between my ties to build taper, and I might put a little bit more of the bucktail butts rearward so that I have some decent shoulders in this fly. I'm going to come up and catch that. 1, 2, 3. Flare that around with my fingernails. Pinch and pinch, pinch and pinch. Then come in, support that hook eye, that shank eye, and make sure that this density is even. If it's not even, you just relax. Now I gave it slack. This is the time to give it slack. And I can remanipulate that, come in, lock it in place. A little bit better there. Again, extra turn, extra turn. I'm using a ridiculous amount of thread pressure on this. And I'll try to make a point here as soon as I tie this off. I'll try to rip some of this out so that you guys can see it. That only has those 5 turns. Bring it up under. You can use that shank eye to help build some of this cone angle so it's not going to slip down because you have that hook eye to help give it some pressure. I don't need this fly to be super beefy, so I'm going to call that good right there. And because we're at the shank eye, I'm not going to worry about flash at the moment. So you guys saw that only had, what, 5 turns of thread on it? That whole stack of bucktail only had 5 turns of thread. Let me show you something. Because I trust my tying, and I trust my thread, and I trust the technique. I could ruin this fly right here in the middle of one of the best tutorials I've ever filmed, and it's not going to come out. The hair will not slip. It cannot come out. I have a solid thread base. My thread on the shank cannot slip. Everything is perfect about that. 5 turns of thread with a round thread that's going to have the most, all the pressures in one spot, pull down as hard as you can with 5 turns. And then it's always under tension. When I reversed it, it's under tension. When I bring it up, it's under tension. And now it's locked in place and it can't loosen up. I cannot get the hair to move. It's critical. And that is our tail stack. Now, you will see when I'm done with this fly, I will get it wet and I will hang dry it, and this bucktail will relax a little bit and it'll look nice and pretty. So this little flare here, a lot of this is static, a lot of this is memory, but the bucktail's not actually that stiff. You'll see when I get it wet and hang dry it, it'll look just like the other one. So, time to come in with a 6/0. Now, if you haven't seen the 6/0 GB Predator swimbait hook, these things are a beast. They weigh just over 2 grams. And I'm going to put a 5mm glass rattle on it. That also weighs, I'll get the actual weight here. Give me a sec. Because we should be a little bit nerdy about this, I think. So the 6/0, 2.1 grams, 5mm glass rattle is at 0.65 grams. This is literally, 2.7 grams of raw hook weight plus the rattle. That's a lot of weight. Now, the thing that's absolutely critical to understand is weight relative to air resistance. A bulkhead is very long and it has a very wind resistant shape because it disturbs air. It has a nice 360-degree bulkhead. And this 2 0.7 grams of raw hook weight makes this thing cast beautifully. So thank you, Mark Sadati, for helping us all not be afraid to go heavy, because weight balanced flies are the future of ESOX, people. It's just legit. So I'm going to come in here. If you have no idea what I'm talking about or what I just said, I made a video on weight balancing flies that you can check out as well, but I'll save it for another time. But I'm going to come in, start my thread way down here, because this is where the rattle's going to go. And again, I told you to save these little mono shards, these little short pieces here. You don't need it very long. Don't cut your face when you do that. And I'm tying those little shards of mono on either side of my hook, and I'm making a rectangular base because it's really hard to put a round glass rattle on a round low diameter hook shank. They really hate each other and they roll and wobble and make a mess. But you put that little base on there and I will literally have, besides the fact that my thread did that, how did that happen? Oh my goodness. I'm filming, people. This isn't supposed to happen. There we go. I'll literally have no issues putting that right where I want it. You might still have to roll it over a little bit, but it'll be happy as a clam to go where you put it because it's got a nice flat rectangle underneath it. So I'm going to load that up with some thread, take my thread off of it to do my half hitch and my whip finish right on my low diameter hook shank so that my knots seat well. Don't try to knot on top of the rattle. It won't go very well. And that is perfectly dead center. And what's wicked cool is it's inside the hook. So it can't catch on weeds, it can't catch on vegetation, and it's protected. So that's the bee's knees. All right, that's more or less good to go, so I'm not going to glue myself onto it. Put down your thread, and look, I'll just reef on that. Make sure I have 0 thread slippage whatsoever. You're going to want to put down a good base. I do that every time, by the way. I just wanted to mention it because I haven't yet. Lock down a thread base so that that's going nowhere. And this is the only tricky part to the whole thing. I got to put a bead on here. Anyway, so I'm coming with the size 3 UV Glow soft bead. These things are crazy fluorescent, by the way, which is pretty sweet because it gives you a hot spot right where you want it, which is in front of that hook point. So I'm going to slide this size 3 on. Remember, the size 3 is a tight fit, but it does fit. Of course, it helps if you give it a little bit of twist and you got some fingernails on there. And I want that right in plane, maybe a little bit up from that. And so because my extended body is going to be pinched on that, what's kind of cool is I can slide that down a little bit further and my hook point will then ride higher. And I can slide it up and I can bury it more. So I can actually use this to increase my hookups or increase my weedlessness depending on where this applies pressure to expose more or less of the hook. Now I'm going to come in, I'm going to find my mono. You got to make sure your bead is on the right side. The bead should be against the 35mm shank so that it pinches everything. Split the difference, lock it underneath. And now, if you remember, I told you, if this is a little tight, you make the gap right here. So you can fix that spacing right here. And I'm going to pull that right about there. Come up and lock that in place with a ton of pressure. And I want that mono coming off of there to be linear. I want this to be nice and straight for the most part. I don't need that much room to tie it in. I don't want that all the way up by the hook eye or else it's going to make my last few bulkhead ties kind of a nightmare. So come in and what you need to do before you really start tying, so well obviously you got to glue it, make sure it's durable, but you want to manipulate those materials because they're going to get trapped around all that hook shank because you just put it in there. So come in with your bodkin and clean it out. Make sure you have hair splitting that hook point on either side so that it looks the way it's supposed to look, and it's going to fish the way it's supposed to fish, which is like that. Come in here, and we're ready to rock. I know this video is going to be forever long, but my hope is that it was extremely thorough so that y'all are on the same page I'm on. Now we're going to come in. I like to do one more color of this, especially since I have some really nice kind of length and flare and waviness to this so that I can bridge this gap in my tying. And I'm going to use, I mentioned earlier how you can use your flash to kind of cover up and hide your mistakes. And this is a really good place where you can do it. Because I wanted some shoulders in that fly. The fly needs shoulders or else it won't swim right. And I'm going to leave that pretty long to help bridge that gap. I'm going to get 1, 2, 3 turns on that. It's easy tying up here because I got a lot of room. I think we're going to try to do 4 of these. 4 bulkhead ties. Cinch that down like crazy. One more time. You see I'm supporting that hook eye every time I do it. Make that nice little cone with your fingers. I got tension on my bob and I never let go of that thing. Switch hands and bring it up with a slight arc so that you don't trap anything. You should be able to look and you can kind of see where your thread went through, but it should be hard to see. Obviously I know where it went through because I could see it all happen, but there shouldn't be a disruption in the hair where your thread comes through. And it takes practice. And if you go straight up, you'll catch a little bit. I use a slight arc when I come up. It's kind of like a Belgian, whatever that's called, when your back cast has a little bit of a lateral swoop to it. A Belgian cast, a Belgian loop or something. There, now I'm going to get that reverse hollow, and I'm going to leave it a little bit big because we're going to start doing normal bulkhead ties, and they're going to collapse that a little bit. And right now, if you see this step is a little bit short. It's not perfect, but I'm trying to build bulk first and foremost. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to hide that with my flash. I'm going to come in, I'm going to cut that about 1 inch short. I'm going to finger taper it so I have good variable lengths to it. Wrap it around my thread, pin it right to the top, and then I'm going to kind of just jackknife it onto either side so that it makes a V over the back. You can even use your thumbnail a little bit, and you can see how much surface area that's covering. It's veiling it. It's not all in one spot. And when I walk that back with my thread now, I've hidden the fact that that bucktail is a little bit short. So you just hide that with your flash. And again, this is a really nice opportunity that's easy and everything's out of the way and you're not crowding hook eyes and you have space to work to put just an extra stack on the bottom. And you can see that V tie really well there because I have on one side of my hook shank and on the other side of my hook shank. And it just gives you a perfect little flash veil to kind of hide your mistakes there. Not that they're mistakes, but it's what we were given as far as our tying materials and availability. Cool. Now, what we're going to do is instead of reverse bulkhead tying, we're going to tie a straight up bulkhead. And I'll show you the difference here. But I'm going to come and move to my root beer colored tail. And I'm going to use, I like to use more towards the base. Now, that's just because it has more flare, more trapped air. It's a little bit more, gives it some volume. So I like to use it, but it's a little bit harder to control. But you want some softer hair. You do want a little bit of softness to it so that you can reverse it back without a massive thread dam. And also, I like it to have some wave. This does not have as much wave as I want, but this is what I have access to at the moment. So I'm going to use some fairly long hair if I can. I'm going to use the longest pinch first. So you'll see the way bucktails are split, there's vertebrae in here, and they have to cut the tail open, fillet it open, and take the spine out. Now, if they're not cut perfectly dead center, A lot of times they're cut a little bit off to the side. You'll have longer hair on one side and shorter hair on the other. So pick the longest hair you can find on the relative bucktail. So this, you can see, this is kind of short up in here, but boom, I just have this massive pinch of 5-inch hair. That's what I'm going to use to help fill in the silhouette, because I had that shorter stack right there over my veil. This is all nuanced. The thing you have to understand about bucktail tying is you can't ever tie it the same, because your hair and your material availability and your ability to select it and every tail and every color combo is different. It's really tricky to be able to tie the same bucktail fly twice. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to tie this like we did our tail stack, right? But I'm going to leave the bucktail butts long. 2, 3. And this is the bulkhead tie. That's why when you do it the other way, it's called the hidden or reverse bulkhead. Pinching on that thread, my hand's on that bobbin. I'm never going to not say that. It's really important. And then I'm going to apply pressure. You can see I'll come in, another wrap, and I'm going to make that little cone with my fingers, push that back, try to make sure that hair is bending 90 degrees without any twist. And this is how we're going to shape and sculpt our head. Come up here. And this is where you have to manhandle some things. You can see I'm reefing on this. I'm pulling really, really hard with my fingers here. I'm going to use my fingers to kind of disrupt and weaken the bucktail a little bit at the base, get it to do what I want. It's really important when you're doing these cones with your thread, especially with the hollow ties and the bulkhead, if your thread angle is kind of like this, you'll build your cone like that. If it's like this, you'll build your cone like that. You need to build your cone symmetrical. Right now, my cone is a little bit high on the top, so I'm going to come underneath and I'm going to even that out. You can see I've changed my tying angle with my wrist to even it out. I went like this to build up more thread on the bottom, and this is all nuance. You have to do this per tie, per stack. Every single one's going to be different. Now as you walk up into that hair, something I do is I pull out more thread than I need so I can tie with relaxed pressure and get it perfectly angled out. If you walk back into that hair, and I'm not going to do it because I'll ruin it, and then you pull down real hard, it'll recollapse and reflare. I'm trying to put thread over the top like this. As soon as I pull down up here, it'll cut and reflare, and it'll ruin all of the progress that you made. You don't want to do that. You gotta be careful right there. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to feather these edges because I don't like clean lines, and I want the whole head to more or less bleed into itself. You shouldn't be able to really tell where each stack is. On the reverse bulkheads, I don't do it because it's hard to get in there and you don't get that much advantage to it, but I want the head to look clean. The other ones are for push and resistance. Just like that. Weld all that, and I'm going to come in with some bronze. I love this. This is probably my favorite color polar flash. This, by the way, is the original idea for this hook. This is the jig hook Swimbait rig. It was okay. I used a piece of suede to literally rig it like you would see a normal swimbait in this, you know, from the gear world. It worked, but it wasn't great. Anyway, I'm going to take that bronze, and this is going to be just kind of an accent because we changed colors, and I want a nice dark kind of suckery tone to this. Tying it in the same way, and I'm only going to tie this one on top. You could also tuck some peacock under there and have some fun with your color combos, but that's going to be just fine for me right there. 2 more stacks. This is go time. Try not to mess it up. And because of my limited room here, they might be a little bit thinner, but it's just so I can get 2 of them instead of 1 of them. Preen those out. Make sure that one had a lot of hair in it, like human hair, kind of insulated stuff. Don't like that. Get that out. It's a little bit denser than I want. I'm going to pin that right there, man. Might put a little counterclockwise twist into it just so I can get a really clean grab. Really flare it, walk it, pinch it. That's got some good air in it. This is going to flare nice. Switch hands. Now that slid down my thread bump, which I'm not happy about because it's going to make my hook eye a little bit crowded. But we're going to manhandle this and make it work. It's not a lot of room, people. That is not a lot of room right there. I told everybody we were getting 4 stacks on here, and we're going to get 4 stacks on here. Every once in a while, you need to impose your will onto the fly. Don't let that thing tell you what it's going to do. You tell it what it's going to do. Otherwise, this ain't going to work. I love it. I always get a little adrenaline rush when I have to do this crap and make something work that's going to be a little bit tricky. You can see my top angle wasn't quite matched to my bottom angle, so I fixed it. Never move forward until you're happy with it. All right, where's my tail? Where'd it go? This is the moment of truth right here. I'm right at the hook eye. I'm going to come in with a short stack of tail. It's all about building taper. As this gets forward, it's okay to get shorter and shorter and shorter. And we're using like 5-inch tail, 5-inch tail, 5-inch tail, 4-inch tail, 3.5-inch tail. And you'll find that variance on your tail. You can just select for shorter hairs. Now this one is not going to be super dense, or else I'm going to get in trouble here. So I'm going to make it nice and thin. Make sure it doesn't have any crap in it, or else this is not going to go well for me. My thread is on the hook eye, but that's okay because we got a big beefy hook eye, and I'm going to be able to use that to my advantage here. Little counterclockwise twist. 1, 2, 3. Seat that back there with your fingernail. This is where you have to really, you see I'm pinching and almost rotating it manually because my hook eye's in the way. My hook eye it's not round, so it's not happy about that. Give that a lot of flare. I'm only going to do 4. Make sure you got a nice, clean, even distribution. This is where the going gets tough. Come up onto that hook eye and then use that hook eye to your advantage and walk that back. Flare it out so it's 360. I'm using my fingernail pressure to do that. Coming in with a soft half hitch. I don't have to be super crazy with my whip finish because that CA Plus is going to plastic weld all this. So once I get the angle I want, it's just about locking it in with enough pressure that I can cheat and use super glue. How's that for a dose of honesty? Boom. They said it couldn't be done. I said, hold my beer. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm not drinking a beer. I've had about 7 cups of coffee. Anyway, I'm going to go through and feather that. And one of the things I do when I'm feathering this, you can see I always hold down my long hairs. And those little short hairs, even from the previous stacks, they'll kind of just poke through. And you just go in and you feather that edge. And anytime you got a little stiff spot, you just work it back. So you got a nice, smooth, clean, round head. Now, if you recall, I mentioned how polar flash is woven, and it has kind of nylon filaments that surround each strand and how it gets stuck in predator teeth. So I'm going to come in now with my little finger dub brush, and every once in a while you'll hear it catch on those filaments, but I'm going to comb them out. And when you comb them out, you might break out 1 or 2 strands, or some of the nylon might rip out or something. It's not a big deal, but it stops it from getting tangled in their teeth. And in my opinion, because it's now been kind of woven and then ripped back open, the flashes limper. It's literally softer because it has some material damage and structure and stuff from being woven like that. And you get a softer flash that is then, it has all these little bumps and stuff in it. It's not smooth, it's not flat. And what's cool is it looks very scaly, and because it's a little bit softer after you break it out, it has just unbelievable movement in the water. So this is why it's my favorite, and it's why it's the only flash that I currently have besides wing and flash. Of course, I tie with the other flashes, and I'll carry them eventually. But to get started, this is what I got in my store, because it's the bee's knees. So you comb that out with a little finger dub brush like that. This is also extremely useful to have with you on the water while you're fishing, especially with synthetic flies, but also to comb out stuff like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put this bad boy in the swim tank. All right, tank's on. Here comes a Swimbait Bob Popovics Beast Fly. Got to get that thing wet. Make sure there's no trapped air in it. Understand that the most consistent water is right about here. As soon as you drop down here, there's a lot of turbulence right up in here, which is why the tail kind of gets sucked down into the tube a little bit, because that's where the water wants to go. This is kind of what it'd look like on the swing or a really fast two-hand retrieve if you could pulse it every time you grabbed the line and stripped it. That's what you're talking about right there. You can see I got a lot of tail action, and it's all because of where we put the shoulders. That's all shoulders right there. All that tail action is shoulders. You can see how that flash really helps bridge the gap of any of your inconsistencies with your bucktail. And the other thing you can see is she's riding true without any sort of keel weight. Understand that that rattle technically is keel weight, and understand that all of the wire down here, everything below the plane of our shanks and our extended body is keel weight. So you don't actually need to weight these. But if you're familiar with Mark Sidotti's weight balance technique, the really cool thing is that even though I think the 2.7 grams is a pretty good amount of weight for casting about an 8-inch bulkhead, especially tied out of bucktail, you have all of that shank to add lead wire, especially in that 45 drop down for casting. So for those of you who are hip to that kind of stuff, that's what's up. Something I'll show you real quick. So I'll unplug the tank and watch, just every time that thing hits the water, it'll right itself and fish hook point up. Every single time it hits the water, it rights itself. You can see we have some pretty good balance to it. Pretty good balance. That's a lot of suspending time right there. If you put a thicker leader on that, look at that suspending. Look at that suspending. That's crazy. You put a nice thick leader on there, fishing on an intermediate line, and you have a ridiculously cool weed bed pike and musky fly. Look at that thing. Wow, that is sick. Man, I've never wanted to fish a fly more in my life. I've these bulkheads, this was the goal from the beginning. A Swimbait bulkhead. This is it, man. This is everything I've ever wanted. Alright. Now one thing I'll do here, make sure those fibers aren't tangled. Get this thing very, very wet. I didn't like the way that came out. Normally I run this under my sink, but you get the whole idea. Pull this thing up as it's wet like this. And what you're going to do is you're then going to hang dry it just like this. And I'll show you where I put them. And that's how you get the perfect silhouette. And that's how it'll fish for your photography. So that's what you're looking at. I just put them on some magnets. And that one's the one that's wet. The one behind it, that is literally perfection, is the one that I did last night practicing for this. So, thank you everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed that tie-up. Some bulkhead swim baits on the 6-aught GB Predator swim bait hook. Check out the merch if you dig that sort of thing and want to support the channel. There's also a poster on how to tie that fly. Maybe I'll put a pic right here, and maybe I'll put a pic earlier when I mentioned that. I think that's everything. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Maybe we'll tie a beast fly. See ya.